All right, welcome everyone to our call this evening. I know we have more people jumping in as we speak. Everyone's always eager to arrive right at the last minute, seems like. But we're excited about tonight. So excited that my wife is even accompanying us for this call, which is the first time she's done this, despite the many topics that she's been interested in. But she thought, I can't miss this one. I've heard a lot about Dr. Glynn, and she's interested in the topic, so she's here to join us. But we are very excited to have Dr. Glynn speaking for all of us throughout Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei. She is, as many of you probably know, one of the more recent additions to our science and development team, and we're super happy to have her. If you read through, I didn't get to see her resume, but some of her background, it's very impressive. And for Unicity, as all of you know, because we talk about it every week on these calls, we're extremely dedicated to finding the top quality ingredients to make high quality products that are based in science. And the reason why that's our focus is because if we create a product, we want it to make an impact in someone's life. Anything that someone is using from us should show in how they feel, should show in what they're able to do, should show in how much they're able to enjoy the life that they live. That's what we're driving for. And so tonight, we're gonna listen to all we can learn and soak up from the time we have with Dr. Glynn. And then at the end, we'll, like usual, have a small Q&A so that we can ask some questions, get some answers straight to your doubts, your concerns, whatever's on your mind, as long as it's related to the topic. Right? We always want to keep the questions related. But on that note, I'm going to stop talking and turn the time over to Dr. Glynn to take it away.
Awesome, Sam. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me tonight. I'm very excited to be here and excited to meet all of you and be here with you tonight. I am going to share my screen, so let me switch over to that in one moment and start this presentation. Okay, Sam, can you confirm you're seeing like the whole slide and not the presentation mode there?
That's correct. Looks great.
Okay, awesome. Well, let's just jump right in. So as I said, thank you, Sam, for having me. Before we get into the topic of protein, I'd just like to give you a little bit of background about me and why I joined Unicity and why I'm really excited to be here. My lifelong passion has been health and wellness. I've been passionate about it, interested in it, studied it since a young age. And when I went to university, I decided to make it my career path. So I have my degree in exercise physiology, my bachelor's, and then I went on to get my doctorate in biomedical science. And interestingly enough, I focused a lot on protein and muscle in my PhD. So this is a fun topic for me, and I'm glad that it's one of my first presentations is talking about something that I know a lot about. From there, I went on to Duke University and did a fellowship in obesity and diabetes. So for about 20 years now, I've been studying and researching muscle health, obesity, metabolism, and diabetes. And I'm excited to share some of that knowledge with you tonight. In terms of Unicity, I was so excited when I got the opportunity to interview for Unicity. I took a look at your product, your website, talked to a lot of your leadership, and I could really tell that there was a lot of passion behind the products that you have at Unicity. And not just passion, but that the strength of science that you've put into the products is really, really good. So I was beyond ecstatic when Dan called and offered me the position. And as your new VP of R&D, I promise you that we will continue to innovate and bring cutting edge products to Unicity that set you apart from the competition, that we will provide you the tools as distributors to communicate that knowledge and science in a way that you and your consumers can understand, and that we'll keep building this team of top scientists and bringing on really strong people to make sure that we are up to date with all the cutting edge science available out there, and we can bring that to you. So without any more talking about myself, let's jump into protein. Today, we will cover a general overview of just what is protein and what do we define as high quality protein. We'll talk about the roles of protein in our bodies and how you can optimize your protein intake for some different situations. And then what Unicity products we have that offer some support for you to make sure that you're getting enough protein in your day. And just as a quick disclaimer, every person is individual. And so please know that these are pretty general recommendations. If you want to make any changes to your diet or start a new supplement, you really should be talking that decision over with your healthcare provider or your doctor. Okay, I wanted to start tonight with the core Unicity principles, nutrition principles, because I love these and I think they're really important. Important for all of you guys to know and memorize as distributors and be able to communicate with your customers. So the first, and what we'll be focusing on tonight, is prioritize protein. And that just means in any meal that you're thinking about, you want to make sure that you are getting enough protein, and we'll talk about what that looks like in a little bit. The second is fuel with fat, and that kind of is tied to the third one of control carbohydrates. So both fat and carbohydrates are fuel sources for our bodies, but we really want to be prioritizing and focusing on fat as a fuel instead of carbohydrates. So we want to control those carbs, make sure if we are eating the carbohydrates that we're getting complex carbs, the good carbs, the fiber, and then focusing more on using the fat as fuel. And then the last one, the 4-4-12 rule, this is more about the timing of when you're eating. So you want to make sure that you allow at least 4 hours between when you eat breakfast and when you eat lunch. And that's to allow your body to kind of digest that meal. Again, 4 hours after you eat lunch before you eat dinner. And that's just a minimum. You could wait longer than that. And then between dinner and the next time you eat the next day or breakfast, you want at least 12 hours. And so waiting those times allows your body to fully digest. It allows your body to switch into fat burning mode for parts of that, just so that we aren't constantly burning the carbohydrate as fuel, allowing you to switch to that fuel as fat. Okay, so all of these are really important. That's why they're all there. But today, let's focus on protein. In simplest terms, proteins are made up of these building blocks, what we call amino acids. So these are individual molecules. They all have different names. Those different colors could represent different amino acids. And when you put them together in a string or a chain, you get a protein. Another way to think about it is like these walls. So the wall on the left is a healthy protein. You can see maybe these different colors and shades of bricks represent individual amino acids, but they all look pretty good and healthy. So this is a nice protein wall. But the wall on the right side is a little bit damaged, right? You can see it starting to break down. Some of the bricks, the amino acids don't look so good. So this would be a case where our bodies go into what's called protein turnover. And we're constantly doing this, where our bodies take proteins that are old or damaged, and we break them down and we build up new ones. So in order to take this wall and turn it back into something that looks nice, like the one on the left, we need a constant supply of new amino acids, those building blocks, those bricks of what we can use to build protein. So that's why it's important to be continually getting enough protein in your diet. So we have a supply of amino acids to build proteins. Okay, so where can we find these proteins? There are so many examples of proteins, but if we want to focus on where you find them in food or dietary protein, it can come from animal sources. That's one of the most common things we think about. So meat, dairy, eggs, those are all animal sources of protein. But we can also get protein from plant sources, and some sources that are high in protein or pretty good sources of protein are legumes, grains, nuts, and seeds. But protein is not just in the foods that we eat. It's also a critical component throughout our bodies. So one of the main components of our muscles is protein. Protein is largely made up, or muscles are largely made up of protein. And protein also makes up a lot of hormones. So hormones you may have heard of, like insulin or ghrelin, which is your hunger hormone and appetite hormone, or your growth hormone. All of these are made up of protein. Another important area that relies on protein is your immune system. So you may have heard of antibodies, which are really important in fighting off infections. And antibodies are made up of protein. And we also have structural proteins in our bodies. So proteins that provide structure. So you can think of connective tissue, things that connect and hold your muscles together. Bone is made up of connective tissue, your tendons and ligaments. These are all made up of protein as well. And last but not least, the millions of chemical reactions that happen in our bodies every second that are catalyzed by enzymes. Enzymes are made up of amino acids or proteins as well. So you can see that basically protein is touching every part of our body, and we really could not live without it. Okay, so if we remember that the proteins are made up of the building blocks, amino acids, then we want to know that there are two kinds of amino acids in our bodies and in food. So the first type is called essential, and essential means that we can't make it in our body by ourselves. So we have to get those amino acids from food. We need them because they're key components of those things that I just talked about, but we can't make it. So if we don't get them from food, eventually we would perish because we need those essential amino acids to build all the things we need. So you have to get them from food. The second kind are called non-essential. So those we can make from little parts of other things. So in some cases you can make a non-essential amino acid from an essential amino acid or from other components that you have in your body. So those are not quite as important to get from food, but we still want to make sure we're getting a nice complete profile of all the amino acids when we think about protein. And that profile of amino acids is what contributes to protein quality, how high of a quality a certain protein is. So protein quality is really made up of two things. The first is that amino acid profile. And what we think about in terms of protein quality there is, does it have all the essential amino acids? So there's 9 essential amino acids. Does this protein have all of those? And not only does it have them, but is it in high enough amounts? So as a quick example, a plant might have all 9 essential amino acids, but it might be really low in one of them. And in that case, we wouldn't call that as high a quality because we need that essential amino acid to be in a high enough level that our bodies can use it. So that's one factor. The second is digestibility. So how well our bodies can digest the protein. Obviously, plants contain a lot more fiber than animal proteins, but fiber can sometimes be harder to digest. So the digestibility, how easy our bodies can break down the protein, is another factor in protein quality. And there's actually a calculation you can do. It's called PDCAS, which stands for Protein Digestibility Corrected Amino Acid Score, which is why people say PDCAS, because it's a lot easier. And basically this takes those two components. So the amino acid score, basically that's calculated on the limiting amino acid, the essential amino acid that's the lowest. And then you multiply that by the digestibility. And that's a percent. So like an animal protein, milk, for instance, is 100% digestible. Your body can use all of that protein. Whereas a plant might only be 80% digestible because of that extra fiber that it has. So a PDCAS score of 1 is basically perfect. Now you can go higher than 1, we don't need to get into that, but 1 or above is a very high quality protein. And then the lower you go down from that, like 0.95, 0.8, those are a little bit lower quality, but still can be good proteins as long as you're kind of mixing and matching different proteins if you're consuming lower quality ones. Here are some key roles of protein in our bodies. And I will say this is not an exhaustive list. I'm really kind of focusing on muscle today, but these are some of the key ones that relate to the title of this presentation, which is Building a Lean Machine. So that dietary protein, the protein that we eat, it can't really be stored in your body. So when you eat a meal, the protein that you eat, it either has to go to some kind of function like building new muscle or making new proteins, or it basically doesn't get used and it gets broken down and either turned into other things or excreted. So unlike fats or carbohydrates, which have places that can store that, like a fat, you can store in adipose tissue, which we know because we all know we can expand our adipose tissue sites, right? Our fat stores. Carbohydrates can be stored in the muscle and in the liver, but protein doesn't really have a place for it to be stored, so it needs to be used. So these are the places it'll be used, either to build muscle, maintain or repair. So that's kind of like that wall analogy where you're tearing down an old protein and building a new one. Renewing other things that are made up of proteins like the hormones, enzymes, and your immune factors. And then another key role of protein is satiation. And this is important when we talk about diet and weight loss, because if we're getting high amounts and sufficient amounts of protein at each meal, that will really help keep you full from that meal so that you aren't tempted to snack or reach for, your junk food later. It'll really help you stick to your diet plan if you're getting the right amount of protein. Okay. Today, though, I'm going to focus mainly on muscle, just because muscle is the best. Okay. Why do we want to build more muscle, or at the very least maintain what muscle we have? Well, I think the first, and not necessarily the most important, but maybe most interesting aspect is that muscle revs up your metabolism. Muscle is a very metabolically active tissue, so that means it consumes a lot of energy. It needs more calories at rest to maintain itself than does fat. So if you're losing fat in a situation and gaining muscle, you're going to increase what we call your resting energy expenditure. And that's what most people think of as their metabolism. So when you say, I want to increase my metabolism, one way to do that is to get more muscle mass, because that is going to require more energy just to sustain itself. Another important factor that muscle is involved in is glucose control. So because it's metabolically active, muscle uses a lot of glucose, so it takes it up from your blood. And if you are actively using your muscles, like exercising, resistance training, moving, that's going to help your muscles take up more glucose out of your blood. And the less glucose you have circulating in your blood, the better your glucose control, right? A third key function of muscle is just function. And I know this sounds obvious, but it is actually really important, because that phrase, use it or lose it, is very true, and especially about muscle. Muscle is important not just to be able to be athletic or play sports, but everyday things. So even your posture, being able to sit up in a chair for a long period of time, being able to walk upstairs, being able to stand up out of a chair, those all require healthy muscle. And if we're not paying attention to our muscle and not exercising them, not taking care of them, we can lose that, especially as we age. And that's the key factor in people losing their independence, is that they're no longer mobile. So that's a really important function of muscle, is to help you move. And then lastly, but not least, it helps protect against metabolic disease. So because it is so metabolically active, healthier muscle means lower risk of metabolic disease. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute of why that is and how that happens. But just to note here for muscle, getting enough protein is key to supporting healthy muscle. So that's why these are really so tightly tied together. muscle and protein and getting enough. Okay, so in addition to getting the right nutrition for healthy muscles, we also need to be physically active. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here when I say you should be active almost every day. I mean, you should at least be aiming to get out and move, whether it's just walking around or doing something a little more intense like resistance training or aerobic training. But exercise is really important to maintaining our muscle health. So first and foremost, it improves strength. It's a little bit of a misconception if you say that you have to be getting bigger to gain strength. In fact, just moving your muscles every day helps them maintain the strength. So you can be getting stronger and not necessarily be gaining more muscle. So that's one thing. But the second thing that exercise can do, and it kind of depends on which type of exercise you do, which we'll touch on in a moment also, is that it either can build muscle if you're kind of doing a resistance training and trying to build muscle, or it maintains muscle. And that just goes back to the using it. As you use your muscles every day, you help maintain them, you help stimulate that muscle turnover to help keep them healthy. Exercise can also increase your bone density. So basically making your bones stronger. That mechanical stress that happens when you exercise and you do weight-bearing activity helps strengthen your bones, and not just your bones, but that other connective tissue we talked about, your tendons and your ligaments. So that's a really positive benefit from exercise as well. And then the last one, and I mentioned this before, but exercising improves your muscles' sensitivity to insulin, nutrients, and protein. So when you exercise, that 24 to 48 hours after, your muscles are more sensitive. So let's just say if you did a bout of exercise and then you drank a soda, your body would handle that sugar better after you exercised than if you hadn't exercised. It will be more able to metabolize the glucose. Your muscles will take up more of it and use more of it. So it's really important that we continually exercise so that we're keeping our muscles in this constant state of being sensitive to the insulin, to the nutrients, and especially to the protein as well. So question of, should I do resistance exercise or aerobic exercise or both? The simple answer, like I said before, is any. It's ideal to do a combination of both. They each have their own unique benefits, but any type of exercise is going to benefit you. Resistance exercise means that you're using some kind of weight or resistance against your muscles. So this could be weightlifting, it could be weight-bearing exercises, like even just a push-up is a resistance exercise. And this is the type of exercise that you want to do if you're trying to gain muscle mass. On the other hand, aerobic exercise has a lot of cardiovascular and lung capacity, pulmonary benefits. So these are things like running, cycling, swimming. There's also, just with that increased blood flow that you get when you do aerobic training, more benefits for your mental health and your brain. So like I said, each one has their own benefits, but ideally you're doing resistance exercise 2 to 3 times a week and aerobic exercise 2 to 3 times a week, and you're just doing some sort of activity almost every day. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about is aging. What happens when we get older? It's not good things in general, unfortunately. There is a condition, it's called sarcopenia, which basically is just age-related muscle loss. And you can see from this picture at the top, the white picture, that it's an MRI image, and it's a young person's leg on the left-hand side. Let me see if I can get a pointer here. There we go. A young person's leg here on the left. And this is the bone right there in the middle, that kind of black thing with the dot in the middle, that's bone. Around here, you can see muscle tissue. So he has quite a bit of muscle. And then this area around the outside that's kind of white, that is fat or adipose tissue. So this is what a young person's leg looks like. And these people were matched for weight and BMI. So even though they weigh the same, this is an older person's leg. And you can see a lot less muscle mass. You can see a lot more fat around the outside of the muscle. And you can also see there's more white inside of the muscle. So that's actually fat that starts to get inside the muscles as we age. And this has consequences, things like increased insulin resistance in your muscles. So this is one reason that we really want to keep continuous good nutrition to help keep those muscles healthy, as well as activity. The second thing that happens as we age is called anabolic resistance. So this is an interesting picture of this older man down here at the bottom. He was a lifelong weightlifter, and this was him at age 67, and he was in pretty good shape, right? Age 67, better shape than I'm in right now. But he continued to do a similar exercise regimen and kept the same kind of diet for the next 12 years. And this is what he looked like at age 79. And you can see there is some loss of muscle mass. He still looks really good for almost 80. But there's this natural loss of muscle mass that's going to happen as we age. So it's really important that we beef up what we have before we start to lose it. Now, I wouldn't say you can 100% reverse this process, but making sure that you are resistance training to increase that muscle mass, and that you are getting higher than the recommended amounts of protein, which we'll be talking about in a minute, can help overcome this anabolic resistance, not get you back to 100%, but it will help blunt that loss of muscle that's going to start happening as we age. And this link right here is just a cool infographic on aging and protein. So if you want to take a quick snapshot of that, I'll leave it up for one more second. Just an interesting summary. I think it's also a good tool that you could potentially share with your customers if you're talking to somebody that's aging and the importance of protein. Okay, let's talk about how much protein we need and where we should get it from. The general protein recommendation, and this is taken from the United States, Canada, but it's similar for European countries, and a lot of countries don't necessarily have an official recommendation, but if they do, it's somewhere in this range. So I used this as a general recommendation. It's 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. So if you want to do that calculation for a 70 kilogram person, or any weight, you just take your weight, 70 or 50, whatever it is, and you multiply by 0.8, and then you'll get how many grams of protein that the typical recommendation is. So for this person, it's 56 grams of protein per day. Now, if you ask most protein experts, so I don't know if any of you have had the pleasure of listening to Dr. Stuart Phillips. He's on our USAB Scientific Advisory Board, and he's a world leading expert in protein. And Stuart will tell you that we need double that, at least. That's his recommendation. And it's the recommendation of a lot of people in his field that study protein for a living. So if you think about double that, that's 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram body weight per day. The other key recommendation that we want to think about is how we eat that protein. So you don't want to have a very low protein breakfast and then eat like 2 steaks at dinner. Okay, you want to try to evenly distribute your protein throughout the day, because that goes back to one of the functions of protein, which is satiety. So if you're eating good amounts of protein at each meal, that is going to help you with satiety, but it also helps you with all those other functions. So if you're getting adequate protein at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you're building muscle, you're repairing muscle at each of those eating occasions, versus if you're not getting enough protein at breakfast, you kind of miss out on that opportunity to have that protein. So that's the second important recommendation. And here we'll do a couple calculations to see what that looks like. So on the left, these are just two different weights as examples. The left-hand side here is a 60 kilogram person. And if you multiply that by the 1.6, you get about 96 grams of protein per day. You divide that by 3 meals, because we're trying to stick to that 4-4-12 and not have a lot of other meals in between there. And you get 32 grams of protein per meal. If you weigh a little bit more, 75 kilograms, you would be aiming for about 40 grams of protein per meal. Now, I will say, we don't know the exact upper limit of how much your body can utilize at one time, but the experts think it's around 40 grams. So eating much more than that in a single eating occasion is not really recommended. So even if you weigh more than 75 kilograms, you should aim for about 40 grams of protein per meal. And I do just want to pop back to this one, because I didn't touch on all these different scenarios. But basically, this 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram per day is recommended for anybody who's doing any of those things that I list. So if you're exercising, you definitely want to be aiming for that higher end of the range. If you're trying to lose weight, you want to be aiming for the 1.6, because that protein is going to provide that additional satiety to help you stay on track. As we're aging, you also want to make sure you're getting that. And one of the issues with older people sometimes is that they start to eat less. Maybe they stop tasting food as much, or they're just not very hungry. So not only are they the people that need more protein, but they kind of eat less. And I don't know over in your area how people do, but a lot of older people in the United States will eat like cereal for dinner. So a grain for dinner. And that doesn't contain a lot of protein. And usually dinner is also a meal where people get more protein. So it's just important to think about and communicate, especially to the aging population. You want to think about your protein in each meal and aim to get that 30 to 40 grams, depending on your weights that we talked about. Okay. How do we get 30 or 40 grams of protein in a meal? It can be difficult. It can be hard to eat that much food, right? And especially depending on what kind of foods you're eating. You can see here, these are just a few good examples of good sources of protein. The animal-based proteins like chicken, eggs, fish, they tend to be higher in protein. So it's easier to reach your 30 or 40 grams with those types of protein. The plant-based proteins like chickpeas or nuts, seeds, those tend to be a little bit lower. But so you would just have to eat more and combine a few different sources of plant proteins to get up to that 30. It's definitely possible, and you should do it based on your preferences for the types of foods that you like to eat. But I think personally, when it's hard to get that much protein from food, supplementation provides a really convenient way to just boost you up to that level. So you could do something, we'll go through a few Unicity product offerings here and how much protein they have, but you could do something like a shake that has 20 or 25 grams of protein and then some food along with it to get you to that 30 or 40 grams. But it's a little bit easier because you're not having to think, okay, how much protein is in this 3 ounces of chicken and this handful of almonds and this cup of chickpeas, right? So supplementation is a convenience thing, and it also can provide that protein with without a lot of the potentially other negative effects that some meats and animal products can come along with. Okay, the first one I want to talk about is called Quadplex. And Quadplex is one of my favorite Unicity products so far. I still haven't tried all of them out. I'm still waiting to get my hands on some of them, but I really like Quadplex. And the reason is it is perfectly designed as a post-workout protein. So it has a really good amount of protein, 25 grams. And this amount has been studied in a lot of research studies for post-exercise recovery that say you should be getting 20 to 30 grams of protein after your exercise session to help stimulate muscle protein synthesis and build muscle. So it checks that box, 25 grams of protein, and it's high quality protein because it comes from whey protein. So we talked about protein quality, and whey protein is a PDCAS of 1. It is very high quality. It contains all the amino acids, the essential amino acids in the right ratios. But the other cool thing Quadplex contains is called branched chain amino acids. You may have heard of this. People call them BCAAs. And the BCAAs, they're amino acids, so they're those building blocks. There's 3 of them, and they are essential amino acids. So they're 3 of the 9 essential amino acids we talked about. And one of them in particular is called leucine, has been studied a lot and shown to be really important in stimulating muscle synthesis. So we included extra branched chain amino acids because leucine is kind of the most important one, but the other 2 also can contribute to synthesis. So we included a bump of BCAAs. We also included vitamins and minerals that support physical activity in general. You need more support from certain vitamins and minerals when you're active. So we have that in there. And then I know there's so many cool things. You're like, what more could there be? There's also this probiotic called BC30, Bacillus coagulans, and it's a probiotic that also has been clinically shown to help with muscle recovery. And one of the ways that it does that is it's believed to improve protein utilization. So basically it helps digest the protein and then it helps your body use it. So it's almost like a boost to the protein. So if you took a normal protein shake that had 25 grams of protein, you would get more benefit, more utilization of the 25 grams of protein in Quadplex because of that extra BC30 that we included. Okay, I think that's all on Quadplex, but it's a really awesome product, and you can take it not just after a workout because it has those vitamins and minerals. You could take it as a meal replacement. Now, it doesn't have a whole lot of the other macronutrients. Let's see, but you could use it as a meal replacement if you wanted to. Okay, the next products I wanted to touch on is called LC, or Lean Complete, and this is actually a meal replacement. So this is one that has a little bit less protein than Quadplex. It has 20 grams, and it's a combination, it's a blend of protein from pea and dairy sources. So it has milk protein isolate, whey protein concentrate, whey protein isolate, and pea, which gives you a really good variety of different amino acids from each of those sources. And if you did want to boost, like let's say you wanted to use this as a meal replacement, but you needed to get the protein up maybe to 30 grams, then you could mix it with milk, some skim milk, and provide that extra protein to get you up a little bit higher. So that's an option. It also contains 13 vitamins and minerals and a lot of fiber. So 10 grams of fiber. You know that we focus a lot on fiber here at Unicity, which is great because it is one of the key pillars to health is getting enough fiber for your digestive system. So a good amount of fiber, and it's low carb. So that combination of fiber and protein in this meal replacement is really going to help you stay satiated and full. This is a good one to take if you're on a weight control plan. Okay, try to get to the next slide. There we go. And last but not least, we have the new, I think it's relatively new for you guys, I'm not sure, LC base. LC base is also a meal replacement option, but unlike the LC that we just saw, it is higher in fat. So, and it's pretty high in protein. It has 27 grams of protein, so a really high amount, which is good. It has, oh, there's the fat, 24 grams. 24 grams of fat, so it's really focusing on that fuel with fat priority, and only 4 grams of net carbs while also having 4 grams of fiber. So you would use this as a meal replacement. Fat is second to protein in terms of being satiating. So the combination of high protein and high fat is also really going to help you stay full after you drink this until your next eating occasion. Okay, and I just wanted to call out on here because I saw it and I thought it was cool since I talked about it. This is the LC base info page, but I show in the red box here just we call out for you that it's an excellent source of high quality protein, PDCAS 1.0. So now you know what that means when you see a PDCAS of 1.0, that means it's the highest quality protein that you can get. So to summarize everything we've talked about, protein, I hope I've convinced you, is very important to maintaining health. It's important to maintaining function and our metabolism. While the recommended amount, the basic recommendation is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, most experts recommend for healthy people. Now, again, if you have any kind of medical condition, kidney disease is one in particular I'm going to call out. You probably don't want to be increasing your protein to 1.6. Please talk to your doctor if you are in that boat. But otherwise, 1.6 is a good recommendation for general healthy population. And we should aim for that amount to optimize our metabolism and our muscles and our health. You want to choose high quality protein and spread it out evenly across your meals, not concentrated in one meal or not getting a meal with really low protein. And both aerobic and resistance exercise help us maintain our muscles and slow the effects of aging. And Unicity offers some awesome protein products that can help you reach your protein goals every day and every meal. I think that's all I have. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll turn it back over to Sam now and maybe take some questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Glynn. It is fascinating every time we learn new things about similar topics. And I actually have one question. I know that my friend Tutik and Sunan have started to send questions in the chat, which I'm sure they're curious about getting answers to. But since I get to unmute myself, I'm going to go ahead and ask a question as well, which was, where could we find a reputable source of learning about, PDCAS for different foods, to be able to see, how all these foods measure up to each other?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's like an official database anywhere. I know there are scientific publications that kind of look at the PDCAS of different things, and I don't know if you have a way to share out tools or information with the group, but I could find a few good sources for you. I think in general, if you Google something and then you look at a scientific article, that would be your most reputable source, or a government website, as opposed to somebody's blog that they are talking about PDCAS. But usually articles that are written about PDCAS, they get that information from the scientific literature. So yeah, I would say first try to find someone on PubMed or any other literature database, and I can help you with that and share.
Okay, great, thank you. But I'll stop taking up your time so that people can get answers to questions that are coming in.
Okay, so do you want me to look at these questions or do you want to ask them?
Yeah, so I guess whatever's easiest for you.
Okay,
If you like, I can
so
just read.
yeah, I can just go through. So Quadplex, better consumed if we exercise right. Too much protein could be stored as fat. So it's somewhat of a myth that too much protein can be stored as fat. And if we have Stuart Phillips back, Dr. Phillips, to talk at like a future convention, I think that would be a really good topic for him to explain. But it is possible to store some excess protein as fat, but it's not going to be the major place that extra protein goes. So I wouldn't say you should worry too much about that, but you're right that Quadplex is best taken after a workout. And then as far as 4-4-12, it kind of should be a timing thing. The thing with taking protein after your workout is it doesn't have to be right after. So that window that you have where your muscles are like a sponge and they're more receptive to protein is, people used to think that that was about an hour after you worked out, 1 to 2 hours, but that's kind of expanded now. The researchers think it can be 8 to 12 hours after you work out. You're still gonna get the same increase in muscle protein synthesis that you would get if you took it right after exercise. So I would say if you're really following 4-4-12 and you don't want to mess that up, then you could take it at your, like you could make sure you take Quadplex with your next meal and then just use the food to bump you up to your 40 grams or whatever you need in that meal. Or the 4-4-12, that's only what, 20 hours. So you still have an extra 4 hours in there. You could time it to where you basically have 4 meals a day, with Quadplex being kind of like your third meal before dinner. So you can mess around with that timing in that way. BC30, we have it in Probiotic Plus. I don't believe BC30 is in Probiotic Plus. Probiotic Plus is mostly lactobacilli and bifidobacteria. So no, it's not in that one. Don't quote me on that. I'm going to play my new card, but I'm pretty sure that BC30 is not in that one. Can take Quadplex as meal replacements. Yes, you could, but like I said, it doesn't contain much fat. So really in a meal, you want to try to be getting protein and fat if you can. Quite concerned about being bulky. Yeah, and for women, I mean, that's always the concern that women say is they don't want to have too much protein or do too much resistance exercise and get bulky. I think there are certainly women that can tend to bulk up if they're doing strenuous resistance training and supplementing with protein. But I think the recommendations for protein that I've given and spreading them out across meals, that's not going to cause you to bulk up. So you'd really have to be trying to actively do a resistance training program and then make sure you're getting the protein after your workout and all that. So I don't think there's a concern for bulking. Plus, based on your weight, you'll be getting less protein than your husband, maybe. I guess that kind of depends on both of your weights. Insigen Plus helps in protein. I'm not exactly sure what that means. Do you mean, does it help you digest protein, maybe? I'm not sure the answer to that question. I'm sorry. But if it has enzymes that come from pineapple or papaya, those are the proteases, and those will help digest protein. So maybe is the answer to that. It kind of just depends on what the enzymes in there are. When we do cardio, do we need the same amount of protein compared to where we have weightlifting? So, I mean, the answer's really no in a way. Again, it kind of depends on your goals, but endurance exercise does still require a lot of protein in your diet because you need to replace basically the energy that you're consuming. I mean, you're in an endurance exercise, you're still contracting and using your muscles just like you are in resistance training. It's just a different form of exercise, and you're often using them to fatigue in endurance exercise. So still getting enough protein to replace those proteins that need to turn over is still important for endurance training. So I would say yes, similar amount. I mean, if you're a bodybuilder, this is a whole other topic that we didn't go into. Like if you're really trying to increase your muscle mass to a greater extent, then we would be recommending higher than that 1.6 grams per kilogram. Okay, what other questions here? In the absence of Quadplex, can LC base be a good post-workout protein recovery? Yes. So I didn't mention the BCAA in LC base. It just has naturally occurring high levels of BCAA because it has so much protein. I think it's 5 or 5.5 grams of BCAA in Quadplex. Yes, I would say it could be a good post-workout recovery because it has 27 grams of protein. It also has the 24 grams of fat, which depending on your exercise goals, you may or may not want that extra macronutrient, but it definitely would have this similar effects of increasing protein synthesis after your workout. Would there be a concern for mTOR with high protein consumption impact on longevity and cancer risk? Wow, somebody is really into the research on protein, mTOR. So my PhD was largely on the mTOR pathway and how protein interacts with it. And then my postdoc was involved in mTOR and insulin sensitivity and how those are related. So what I would say for that is no, it wouldn't be a concern unless you're going higher than that recommendation. So if you start to get into really high protein levels, essentially that your body can't use, that's when I think you start to get an overload of those cell signaling pathways that can start to have inhibitory effects on insulin signaling, for instance. But I don't think at the range that we are talking that you would need to be concerned about that. Now, in terms of longevity, there is a lot of evidence for things like caloric restriction and longevity, right? So in general, if you're concerned about longevity, I would focus more on your total caloric intake and then making sure that you're getting the good distribution of prioritized protein, fuel with fat, and minimizing carbs within a lower caloric intake. And that's the best evidence that we have for longevity at this point, I think. Okay, what is mTOR? It stands for mammalian target of rapamycin, and it's just a signaling protein in your cells. It basically is the initiator of protein synthesis. It's important in turning on protein synthesis within your cell. So basically you can't get new muscle growth without stimulating mTOR. For a skinny person, isn't ideal, go for a regular protein shake daily because of feeling burning out most of the time. Currently I'm on LC base, mostly for morning shake as advised. Yeah, I guess, are you asking, is it ideal for regular protein shake daily? I think, yes, you should, if you feel like you're burning out most of the time, meaning that you're not getting enough energy from that protein shake, I would check the caloric content and how much protein you're getting. Like if it's only 20 grams, I'm not sure which protein shake you're taking. If you're only getting 20 grams and maybe it doesn't have any other fats or vitamins and minerals or important nutrients in there, you might think about combining it with something else, like combining it with other food or milk or something that's going to bump up the energy content and the protein content. Like to know about Unimate fuel and if it's good enough meal replacement breakfast. To be honest, I don't know what I'm supposed to say here, Sam. My initial response would be I would not use it as a meal replacement. But I don't know off the top of my head the macros on that.
it's really more of a tool to help people who are doing an intermittent fasting, or trying to expand that fasting window in their 4-4-12. But I don't think that a Unimate fuel by itself is ever going to provide the nutrients that you would get from a regular meal replacement. And
Yeah.
we're running out of time, so I'll let you answer, 2 more quick questions, let's say.
All right, I have 2 more right here. Okay, with emphasis on protein and fat, are carbs important or play any role in our health? Yes, carbs are important. Fiber is a carbohydrate, so that's very important. But I think that goes to the part of the control carbs doesn't mean don't eat carbohydrates. It just means that you should be smart about the carbohydrates, that you should focus on getting carbohydrates from natural sources that are providing a benefit. So the things like fiber, the complex carbohydrates that are slower digesting versus simple carbohydrates, simple sugars, added sugar, things like that. So yeah, carbs are important and we need them in life, but this is just more of a controlling them in a smart way, I think. And then the last question, is it consuming Quadplex only as meal replacement would be same satisfying as normal LC, or we need to add another meal to add satisfaction, negative effects? This is a lot of questions. Sorry. So I think the first question is consuming Quadplex as a meal replacement as satisfying as the normal LC. It's hard to say. It has more protein, but less fat, I think. Is that, let's see, 20 grams. Oh, it's the fiber. So it has, LC has more fiber, but less protein. So it's hard to say because the combination of fiber and protein can be very satiating. So I think you would just have to experiment and see which one you feel more satiated taking. So I'll leave it at that, Sam, and let you close it out.
Great. Thank you. And, Tutik, I know you have a bunch more questions, it looks like. We wish we had time to get to them all. But I know that if you reach out to your local product trainer, Winda, she can answer those, or she can also communicate right with Dr. Glynn to get answers for those questions. But on that note, we want to give a big thank you to Dr. Glynn for staying up, working late tonight to provide us with this training, this information. It's so great to have you on the Unicity team and be able to learn from you and all the experience you've done. And so hopefully sometime in the future, we'll get to have you on here again, but we'll give you a break for a couple of months at least.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a good night.
All right. And have a good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us and thank you for your questions.